That is done.
Hi, Firas.
Hi, Tia. Hi, Alan.
Hey, buddy. You're just
How
in
are you?
time. I'm about to hit the go live button. Should we quickly send a mute round here?
Yes, let me do that.
Good stuff. Right, let's roll. Okay, team. We should be underway. You should be seeing my screen and hearing me.
Yep, we can see it.
Cool. Cheers. So just a quick few words from me, as per usual, for those familiar with these events, and then we'll get underway with the Excel formula goodness that is awaiting us. So I'll hand over to Neil shortly and allow Neil to introduce himself better than I can. I'll just focus on any upcoming events or any news, and then we'll stop boring you and get to it. So this is our October virtual event, just running through normal stuff. So we are streaming on Zoom for those here, and also on my YouTube channel at the moment for those there. Hello to you. And what that means for us is that this event is recorded to my YouTube channel, and links for that recording, if you need to play anything back from today's session, is first of all available in the Meetup description. I guess I'll pop a link to the event here shortly for those who may not be aware of that and have come via other channels, but also in a follow-up email. Now, we send a follow-up email with anything that may come up of interest today, whether that's the replay link, files, upcoming events, discount codes, formulas. I don't know what will come up apart from the replay. But that email will only go to those of you who have RSVP'd on the event page, as we'll send a message solely to them to not frustrate people who weren't interested. So if you're looking for that email, make sure you've RSVP'd on the event page. Just checking my side monitor here. It's in the chat of the Zoom right now, and I'll throw that into the YouTube when I'm set. Let me just copy that ready. Outside of that, these are upcoming events for this Meetup group. So fairly stacked virtually until the end of this year, and then we'll see what happens at the start of next year, really. So first of all, we've got one more event coming up towards the end of this month, which is an in-person event. So that will be at the Microsoft Reactor in London. And we have Ben talking, who some of you may know from Global Excel Summits and other events. And he's going to be talking about Power Pivot, essentially. So these in-person events are great. They're much more difficult to organise, much more costly, much more effort. But it's great to do the in-person thing and get to meet people properly and have a good old time around Excel. So if you can make it to that on Halloween night, can you believe? We'll be doing that. Otherwise, back to the online business. We have our November event with Steve, who works with Some Product, formerly on the Excel team at Microsoft. And he'll be talking about how we can customize Excel using the likes of cell styles and templates. In December, we have Laura, who I think is on this call at the moment, who'll be talking about visualizations. So it's lovely how we can mix things up from Power Pivot to, customize an Excel through to Power BI style visualizations. Very different kind of aspects of Excel. And then from there, in the start of January, we have Summit.
Alan, we're no longer seeing your screen, by the way, just in case you want to share.
Sure.
We were in the beginning, and then the last...
And Laura is here. Should be still sharing. Give me a
5-6 seconds.
Quick mention, team, if there's any problems. Let me maybe stop a share and try again. Okay, Jess says she can see it. Okay. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Might be something on my side. Sorry.
No problem. You're right. Yeah, in January, Summit's going to be talking about data cleaning and extraction using regex or regex, or you guys can argue over the pronunciation. Don't introduce with Neil's presentation though. So a very new hot topic. Well, I don't know if it's hot, but it's certainly new to the world of Excel. And if it means absolutely nothing to you, come along in January. Summit will explain it all. although you've got a little bit of a wait, maybe do a bit of homework before then. But yeah, quite a nice array, see what I did there, of events coming up. Stay tuned, get involved. They're all on the Meetup page, link in the chat window. Oh yeah, there is more for me to say. There's a big event, isn't there? We've got some news to share soon as well. In terms of big events, in February next year, we have the Global Excel Summit, who many of you on this call will be very familiar with, and have probably got your tickets already. If you've never heard of it in your life, or if you haven't got your ticket yet, move quick, because early bird tickets are still available, which means a whopping 30% off prices. And you can use the LEM15 code, London Excel Meetup code, for an additional 15% off. So that is on top of your 30, aka 45% discount, which is, at the risk of stating the obvious, pretty big. If you know nothing about this, it is a 3-day conference, 2 potentially in person if you fancy it, in the greatest city in the world, in my biased opinion, of London, and then 1 which is online. It is 3 days dedicated to Excel. If you love Excel, this is quite literally the best place to be. Whoops, and I've just messed up my PowerPoint. Here we go. Tons of Excel sessions, access to the virtual platform, networking. We have the master classes, which is an optional extra, CPD hours. It's basically just a load of seminars and tutorials Excel in a nice networking environment with loads of Excel enthusiasts. It's a pretty cool place to be. If you're not familiar, I'll get a link in the chat for that soon as well, so you can check it out and read more about it. But yeah, tickets are available now at probably the best price they'll ever be. Oh, link's just gone into the chat. Saves me a job, I guess. Right, I think that is quite possibly me, you'll be glad to know. Are there any other slides? No, there's not. There's a horrible looking screen. Neil, please come and save me from this black screen.
You got it. Absolutely. All right. Let's see here. Yep, I do have it. Excellent. Well, thank you very much for having me on board, Alan, and thanks so much for sticking with me all. I know we had to reschedule our event today from a previous date, so thanks so much for sticking with us and signing in today. So as Alan was just saying, my name's Neil, and I run a business called Knack Training, where I teach a lot of Microsoft products, and of course, Excel would be one of them. Excel is probably the #1 with a bullet, up there with Teams at this point. And I do a lot of end user training. So there's a lot of days that I walk in and I say the words Power Query, and nobody's ever heard those words before, and it becomes a very exciting day for those folks. If after today's session, what's up? Everything okay? Okay. If after today's session you want to follow up with me for any reason, my email address is just my first name @knacktraining.com. And I pushed to Taya and to Alan prior to today's session, both the file that I'll be using today to play around with stuff in Excel and a PDF guide that has a bunch of the hyperlinks in it. And I do tutorials on youtube.com/knacktraining. So, and yes, I did name my business with a silent K so that nobody ever knows how to spell the company's name. It's a great job by me. You definitely, anytime you want to name something effectively, make sure that people don't know how to spell it. It's great. It's a great business practice. All right. So our goals today, at least my goals today, are to really talk through all the different ways that dynamic arrays can be brought to bear to make your reports more useful, more dynamic, more future-proof, more foolproof, and also more capable. There are plenty of tools that are in Excel that can simply leverage dynamic arrays now because Microsoft improved the function engine to include the ability to basically do what we used to do with CSE functions, but natively here. And then the real stars to me, the ones that make everybody's hair blow back, are the functions for cleaning and reshaping and finding things and stuff like that. Then at the end, we'll definitely talk about group by and pivot by, which are some very interesting new tools. And there are definitely some use cases where, you know, if you're to weigh for yourself pivot tables versus pivot by, there are some interesting use cases where pivot by is definitely superior to pivot tables, and vice versa for that matter. Let's be very clear. I am never telling anybody don't use pivot tables, at least not in 2024, not in 2025. We'll see about 2026. Who knows, really? Okay, for anybody who is catching up. So back in 2018, Microsoft said that you can now use dynamic arrays in spreadsheets, which means that you can refer to arrays of cells, you can return arrays of cells, and you don't have to use Control-Shift-Enter to accomplish this. There are going to be some new functions for you, and there's a new way of referring to things that use these array functions. So now, for example, if we use a function like the unique function, because the unique function could possibly return multiple cells of information when it executes, there's no real way to know ahead of time how many cells will be filled in with content. So when we refer to cells that are spillable, we use the name of the, or the location of the first cell plus a pound sign, or depending on your generation, maybe that's an octo, what is it? Anyway, maybe it's a hashtag. Yeah, maybe it's a pound sign, whatever suits you. And that's Octothorpe. Thank you. Thanks. I realized too late that's what you were trying to say. I listened to a Radio Lab about the Octothorpe, right? Or maybe it was a 99% invisible. But anyway, so we have these functions that can now spill information across multiple cells. If you are using these functions, they still maintain compatibility with previous versions. I'll be perfectly frank, everybody, backwards compatibility is never my in my repertoire. I always say, hey, you know, there was a couple of years back, somebody came to me and asked if I could teach a group of people how to move from DOS to Windows 95. This was in the 2020s, everybody. I was dumbfounded. I was like, I'm sorry, I have left every part of my brain that knew anything about DOS way, way far back in the past. So forgive me if I can't talk too much about the backwards compatibility side of things. But what's really interesting is between sort and filter and unique and sequence and XLOOKUP and VStack and HStack and wrap rows and pivot by and group by, we have just dozens of new functions that have incredible new power. So today's session, my goal is to give you all some scenarios that you either have or have not thought about in terms of how these types of functions can solve problems or make reports that are more dynamic and more protected against what other people try to do with them. You know, like I said, I teach a lot of end user classes, and so a big part of my brain is devoted to, I made a good spreadsheet and then I handed it to somebody who didn't know what they were doing and they made it into a bad spreadsheet. So I always keep that part of my brain going of like, what can I do to protect people, to make them so they don't have to touch my spreadsheet that often, and so that they get exactly what they need. So for the rest of the session today, my goal is to pop into Excel, lead a conversation about all this stuff, and go from there. Everybody, for the rest of the session, I was telling Alan and Taya about this beforehand. Please don't hesitate, pop things into the chat. I'll definitely see if I can stay on top of the chat as much as possible here today, and tackle questions as they occur. And lastly, everybody, I'm never going to be the sort of person who tells you I have the latest perfect version of everything. So if you have a suggestion that improves on something I'm going to show you today, I would love to see that. All right. So if everybody's feeling good, I will jump into our ideas and exercises today. Oh, I guess I closed my spreadsheet. Okay. Reopening the spreadsheet. All right, everybody. So the first piece of the puzzle, very, very simple. I want to make sure anybody who has not experienced this before can see this in a very simple example that doesn't really have anything to do with any of the new functions. And this is purely that if we use array references and we put it into a scenario where the response should be more than one cell's worth of information, that we will get a spilled response from that function. So in this instance, everybody, pretty straightforward. I have a unit cost and I have a quantity column. And I, of course, would like to multiply the unit cost by the quantity. Now, what almost every person on the planet would do right now is do a multiplication of C8 times D8 and then autofill that down, or potentially put it into a table so that it autofills itself. But in Excel nowadays, with basically almost all of the standard Excel functions will accept the following. I'm going to highlight all the cells in the unit cost column, C8 through C21, put in a little multiplication symbol here, and highlight all the cells in the D column, D8 through D21. And this could, theoretically, if you wrapped this up in a sum, or just made a sum product for that matter, give you the grand total of this whole thing. But what I'm looking for is really to have a subtotal column. And so when I hit enter on my keyboard, I see that this is what is called a spilled function, that the result of using arrays in my calculation, the array of cells from C8 through C21 times the array of cells from D8 times to D21 results in a spilled range of cells, an array of cells from E8 to E21. Now, on top of that, just in terms of visual indicators here, if I click outside of those cells, all the visual indicators drop off of it. If I click onto cell E8 right here, you see that clicking on cell E8 puts a blue border around E8 through E21, gives me kind of a drop shadow effect behind those cells, showing me that whatever is in cell E8 is then connected to the rest of the cells. And the further visual indicator that you'll get here is that what's in cell C8 results in the formula bar in being full black text, very clear version of that text. Whereas if I click in cell E9, that text that was fully black and clear now becomes a middle gray color. And of course, I can't see that as well as I could the black color. And that's because what Excel is indicating to me is that the function is actually in cell E8, and then what's in cells E9 through E21 is simply the effect of the array function spilling. So really changing something in E9 isn't possible. Changing something in cell E8 is possible. However, as a quick reference here, everybody, if you go into the middle of that and you insert something, this will generate a friendly error message that tells you I am trying to spill this down and you've gotten in the way, so please get whatever it is out of my way. You delete that and it respills into the space. Is everybody feeling comfortable so far today? Concerns, frustrations? Feeling good, living right? Lovely. Okay. And I love this one because so often when I did data tables in, the last 20 years of teaching Excel, I would do a data table and they'd be like, ooh, isn't that cool? It fills in the whole space automatically for you. But now if you use arrays as part of a calculation, like in this case, we would do a payment function where we're trying to figure out the different payments we would get at different price amounts and different percentages. we can actually have all of these cells filled in automatically. So again, here I will use a PMT function, the payment function. I'll put in the rate that we are going to pay as the entire column over here on the left-hand side, divided by 12 for a yearly rate. Number of payments at 300, and the present value as this row across the top. And when I hit enter on my keyboard, it automatically fills in the remainder of those cells very nicely. So whether it's a sum, a multiplication, whether it's a payment function, an average function, what have you, these old school tools that we have been using for decades at this point all respond really nicely to inserting arrays instead of individual cells, and now can spill instead of occupying a single cell when the result comes back. There are some exceptions to this, but many of them can actually be gotten over using little tips and tricks and things like that. But now, everybody, for the remainder of the class, I'm going to stick to the newer functions that have come out in the last 5 years or so. Okay. So item number 1 is so again, everybody, you have to realize I've been teaching Excel for a long time, so I have been teaching VLOOKUP so often. I mean, just everybody and their mother wants to know how VLOOKUP works, and then when they do, they want to know how they can get VLOOKUP to do a whole bunch of things that it can't do, right? You all, I'm sure, and many of you, I'm sure, have very early on, you got to, okay, I know what VLOOKUP does. I want it to do this other thing. It doesn't do that. Okay, I guess I need to use index and match to do something. Maybe I need to use an advanced filter to do something that is similar to what I'm trying to accomplish. And then XLOOKUP came along, and as well, filter and unique and sort. And I realized that basically everything that people have asked me for over the years to make VLOOKUP better is now available to us. So very simple here. The unique function, really easy function to understand. If I have a data set over here that has many different locations in it, if I want a unique list of those locations, we use the unique function, right? So up here on lookup and reference, we find a huge percentage of our dynamic array functions. And here I find unique as my function and highlight the array of cells that have the locations in them. And when I hit enter on my keyboard, again, it spills my list of locations. Now, if you want a drop-down menu that has a dynamic list of those, you'll go up to the Data tab at the top of the screen, click on Data Validation, and your reference will be to the first cell that contains a location, in this case, cell L8, and then a # or a hashtag or an octothorpe all the way down from there. So starting from Hammermill, going down as far as it needs to, I click OK, and the drop-down menu contains everything from that unique list. And I find so many people who learn how to use VLOOKUP really just want to be able to filter their data set, because so many people say, well, what if there's not a unique entry that matches this? And I go, well, then you're missing the point, right? That's what VLOOKUP is all about. So if we want to return a data set that is related to something, if there are multiple entries, then we're going to use the filter function to successfully accomplish that. So I go to cell L17 here, = filter. I can highlight the array of cells from first name over to salary here, comma, and then highlight the locations where they're equal to Brookmore and return those values. And then if I want to chop down some of these columns, we're going to talk about this more in very, very soon. but we can put in a second filter function to remove the unnecessary columns here. So if I was looking for first name, last name, division level, and salary, I would want to skip over location and date of hire. And so here inside this function, we want to have a second filter function where the include is a set that includes ones where you want to see the column and zeros where you don't want to see the column. So in this instance, I would go, I want to see the first name column, that's a 1, comma. I want to see the last name column, that's a 1. I want to see the division column, that's a 1. I want to see the level column, that's a 1. I don't want to see the location column, nor the date of hire column, so those are zeros. And then comma 1, whoops, comma 1, easy for me to say, for the salary column. When I hit enter, it chops it down to just those columns that I want. And the ability for somebody to now hit the drop-down menu and select Yellow Cliffs, or to be able to select San Clemente from that list, that right there, let's just take a beat, right? So often, the problem that people run into is that they're trying to create all the smaller data sets they can possibly imagine. They need for the manager of this department, the manager of that department, to see the subset that they're interested in. And so that usually involves them copying and pasting things thousands of times. And of course, every time you copy and paste something, you open it up to the possibility that the data will change, and whatever you copied and pasted will not change to include that. So here, if we set something up for our colleagues that allows them to quickly create a filtered data set from the thing that we're looking at, it makes our lives a lot easier. It makes it more likely that people will simply use the tool rather than spending a lot of their time and energy copying and pasting and trying to see if they have the latest version of that data. Okay. How's everybody feeling so far? Ideas, commentary, curiosities? Life is good.
It's all very quiet at the moment.
Yeah. Thanks, Ross. Appreciate it. All right. Looking good, everybody. Oh. Ronak, feel free to throw anything in the chat you want. Happy to. All right. So we've got our data sets. We've got pulling subsets from those. Very nice, very simple to do. And as I said earlier, everybody, one of the beautiful things that came about from all this wave of new functions is that I basically tell everybody to learn XLOOKUP and to just make the make the tool work in exactly the way that you want it to, without having to learn index and match, without having to do a ton of copying and pasting things around. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, Lee. So everybody, in case you didn't pick up on it that first time around, what Lee's talking about there is by putting in this array of Boolean values in the include field, we're able to tell it which columns to include and which columns to exclude. I'm going to talk more about how filter and or choose calls will actually work in some interesting ways with things like this. Okay. Let's see here. If I have arranged a filter instead of just one criteria, absolutely. So Ronak's asking an important question here, everybody, multiple criteria filtering. So basically the gist of this is think of every time that you filter as 0 and not 0, 0 being false, not 0 being true. And so if two things have to be true at the same time, that would be not 0 times not 0, right? If you multiply anything by 0, you'll get 0 out of it. So what you do here, when you have multiple criteria to filter by, is you multiply those criteria against one another. If you want two criteria to be in an or type relationship, so and is when two things have to be true at the same time, or is when either or the other can be true, then you can add those things together. So in this instance, let's say, for example, that I want to do a salary, let's do actually level of level 2. Okay, so I have added that on top of it being San Clemente, it should only be the people who are level 2 people, right? So I go back to that function and I say, okay, give me that filter function right there. Oops. Let's try that again. Okay, so on that filter function in the include, this right here results, as you can see right here, in false, 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 and then there will be some trues farther down the line. Let me actually get one where there are some trues. I'll pick Hammermill here. Okay, so let's try that one more time. So pull this up. Okay. So right here, you see that H8 through H1053 being equal to 08 comes back as true, true, false, false, false. So anytime it's true, think of that as a 1. Anytime it's false, think of it as a 0. And so what you want to do here, and I always just throw these in parentheses, it helps my sanity a little bit to make sure that that's being treated as a separate thing. We then multiply it by, and in this instance, we need to know if the G column, G8 through G1053, is equal to L2 right there. And we close the parentheses right there. Now, everybody, when you see this, it comes back as 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to find Hammermill and L2, which is in here somewhere. Let's see. There we go. So as you can see, everybody who's in here, you can't actually see that they're all Hammermill, but let's look for Bobby Tittle very quickly here. Or let's actually resort, right? Why not? Okay, so Robbie, Allison, why not just sort by level and by location, huh? There we go. Okay, so we have in Curtis Allen, who's in research in level 2, and Curtis Allen, who's in research in level 2, is a person who works at Hammermill. So that's the idea here, everybody. I apologize for taking that little bit of tangent there to actually get to the point where you could see that that was a Hammermill person. But because I had trimmed out the Hammermill column, I wanted to be very clear that it was all Hammermill folks who were still showing up. So again, whenever you try to exert a filter of some kind, use that concept of zeros and ones. In this case, multiplying them against one another allows you to say 0 times 0 is 0, 0 times 1 is 0, but 1 times 1 is 1. All right, looking good. Feel free to keep stacking questions up in the chat if you like, and we'll go from there. All right, so XLOOKUP. So the first one, the easy one that is so pleasant is that XLOOKUP can go from right to left, right? So here I have a vendor ID number. Here the vendor ID number is on the right side of the data set. And that, of course, is kryptonite for VLOOKUP. VLOOKUP hates data on the right-hand side. So when we use XLOOKUP, we're not tied to the same problems that VLOOKUP had. I can come up here to formulas, lookup and reference, and find my XLOOKUP. And I can look up the value for the vendor right there. And then you see here the lookup array and the return array are separated from one another in XLOOKUP. So that is our first improvement over VLOOKUP. In VLOOKUP, you only had the table array where the data was, and the lookup column had to be the leftmost column. In XLOOKUP, we have the lookup array and the return array as independent entities. So I can now highlight all the vendor ID numbers here, and then give us back all of the services over here. So I'm looking for V7694 in the AH column over on the right-hand side, and returning what's in the AF column over here on the left-hand side. I hit OK. I double-click to autofill down, and I just love everything about that. Yes, absolutely right, Faraz. So Faraz is talking about CHOOSECOLS. We're going to get to that in just a moment here, I promise. Thank you very much for that one, Faraz. Okay, so this is item number 1. XLOOKUP can go right to left, which is lovely. The second one, the first time I ever saw somebody use XLOOKUP to return an array, I just about cried. It was a beautiful day for me. I realized, oh, I can do so much more with this. And so the idea here, everybody, is as follows. When you go into XLOOKUP, I just told XLOOKUP that the return array was just the AF column over here on the right. But as you can see, I have my service column and my vendor type column in this order, in the same order as they are over here. And so because of that, all I have to do now is highlight all of the first and the second columns together. So I highlight the AF column and the AG column together as the return array. And now XLOOKUP will return, as you can see here, spilling across to the right. So it's given me food and entertainment and a master agreement right there. And when I fill that down, you can see again that it consistently spills across to the right as it needs to. So if your columns that you are doing the lookup in match the columns that you are looking up to, then XLOOKUP does this as easily as falling out of bed. It's a lovely little tool there. However, there are plenty of times when the columns aren't exactly right, right? You decide that you want to, excuse me, that you have them in different orders, or maybe you have to skip over some. And so here, the one that I will show you in this particular example is that if I have the employee ID number, but the employee name and the cost center, exactly, yeah, Evan, non-contiguous results, right? So what do we do if we have to go across multiple columns? We can use things like CHOOSECOLS, like Faraz is talking about. We can also just do a simple XLOOKUP and nested inside of an XLOOKUP. I said simple. I don't know why I used the word simple. It's simple enough, but it's definitely something. It's a little bit of fun here. So in this instance, what I do is I say, hey, I would normally do an XLOOKUP for this employee ID number, comma, and then I would look for those employee ID numbers in this column. Great. But then for the return array, I say to myself, I can't just highlight employee name and cost center, right? Employee name and cost center would return it so that they were in the wrong spots. And if we had multiple columns sort of sprinkled across going to the right, again, we have this issue where we realize that we need to be able to tell it which column we're interested in. Now, in VLOOKUP, we could use a match function to accomplish this. We can use XMatch to accomplish this, but we can also just rely on good old XLOOKUP to accomplish this as well. So here with the return array, I could do an XLOOKUP. This is a good place to tell you this. In case you were not aware, I don't know. Actually, I shouldn't say this like I know. Everybody, I treat the X in XLOOKUP as meaning both X like it's new and cool, like, you know, things have a special X in front of them or something like that. But also, I treat it like going both directions. XLOOKUP can go both vertically and it can go horizontally. So it replaces VLOOKUP and HLOOKUP. Exactly, like the iPhone X, exactly. I just think of it, you know, X kind of makes it sound fancy, but also I think of it as it goes both directions. So in this instance, everybody, I can use the lookup value for the cost center right there, AB7, Now, I'm going to use a mixed reference here to keep it in the 7th row, but not lock it to the AB column because I'm going to copy this over to the right as well. And then comma, I'm going to look that up over here in the employee name and cost center areas. And then lock that down. And then finally return the appropriate column from these two columns right here. And so with that, with those two things working together, you see that this goes this oh, no, it doesn't go that direction. What did I mess up? Who knows? Oh, I messed up this one right here. Sorry, you do enough talking, right? And all of a sudden you realize you don't do everything the right way. Okay, so I need a mixed reference on AA8 right there in order to keep it in the AA column, but not in the 8th row. That was the one thing I was missing right there. So if I look up the employee ID number and say, hey, it's over there in the AJ column, and then I say to it, okay, it's possible I might need the AK column or the AL column. Let's look it up based on the label at the top of the column. That's what function I've got built right now. And so you see right there, it's Chicago going that one, Mason King going that way, and all those people and cost centers going down. So everybody, yes, if we have columns that are not connected to one another, or they're in the wrong order or what have you, you can use a variety of these different array functions to give you back the results that you're looking for. The most common way that I do it is I nest XLOOKUP inside of XLOOKUP to accomplish this. But there are a range of different things that you can do with things like HStack and CHOOSECOLS and stuff like that. How does that work for everybody? Ideas, curiosities, things I can help you out with. Looking good. Okay. So down that same path, everybody, I found this to be rather entertaining for myself. I really enjoyed trying this out, and I think this could really help in some specific scenarios. So earlier, I talked about how the filter function could allow people to get the results they were looking for just by using like a little drop-down menu and giving them a filtered result, which is nice. What I'm going to do here is we're going to take that to its next logical place. And here I'm using what is a relatively new feature of Excel. So if your group doesn't have 365, I don't think you have this any other way. But I went up here to insert, and I inserted checkboxes into a bunch of cells here. And I made those represent the different columns from the data set. So here's my vision, if you'll stick with me on this. My vision is to create a filtered data set out of this thing over here, right? Whatever is over here on the left, we're creating a filter for it, but we're also allowing our coworkers to choose which columns are returned as part of that filtered data set. So it's kind of like they're building their own report, right? They're able to say, grab me these bits of data from this date range and this region and these columns and all the rest of it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to build up to this. I think it's a really interesting use case. I definitely see people who can use this in my day-to-day life. All right, so we'll start with the basics, which is how would we filter this data set over here based on start date, end date, and project site. All right, so we start off with that. That is your basic filter function. Oh, yes. All right, so filter function, =, filter. We highlight all the cells that are in the data set. And we decide to include in the instance that all three things are true. So I first highlight the date shipped column and set that greater than or equal to the start date. And again, we put that into parentheses. And then we multiply that by the second thing we're interested in, that the shipment date needs to be, less than or equal to the end date. And we put that in parentheses. And then we multiply that by the project site being Cascadia. So we highlight the project site column and set that equal to Cascadia. And once again, some parentheses here. So when I hit enter on that, that should give me back all of my date information, not formatted, as we talked about just a second ago. We would want to do a little bit of that for ourselves. Now, if we want to return the header row at the top, the function we're going to use there is called vstack. We can vstack the headers on top of the filter. Pretty straightforward there. So in here, we use the vstack function, and we first highlight the range of cells up here on the top. That's going to be the headers, and then a comma and the filtered result. Okay. So that's getting us pretty far toward what I was just talking about. Can we get a filtered result of the data out for our people? But where it gets interesting is, what if I wanted them to be able to click the check boxes for the shipment date and the volume and the weight and the cost and who the manager was and the shipping mode, and only keep those columns? Would that be feasible to do? So the way this works is that, number one, these check boxes are simple, again, trues and falses. Because they're trues and falses, we can use any kind of logical function we want in order to generate a list that we're looking for. So in this case, I'll use the filter function, and I'll say, hey, filter these numbers right here by whether somebody clicked the checkbox or not, true or false. Now, the unfortunate thing is that in order to make this work, we have to then take all that text content and put it in as comma results in here to be able to use the CHOOSECOLS function. So the CHOOSECOLS function is a function that allows us to, as you might imagine, you say, here's the range, and then you tell it which column, etc. you want to hold on to. So what I want to be able to do is pass this thing that I want columns 1, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 dynamically. So the way I'm going to do that is by using the function array to text with the filter function. So here's how it's going to go. First of all, I will use the array to text function and the filter function together here. So =, array to text. What is the array? I'm going to give it the filter function. I'm going to say, give me all of these numbers, comma, with the idea of including them or not based on whether they're checked or not. And then I close the parentheses and I hit enter. And as you can see right there, everybody, I get 1, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And if I click on 2, or if I deselect 5, you can see that that numbered list gets modified. So now what I can do is I can put this in with the, let's see here, value function and the text split function. And I'm going to tell it to split the text wherever there's a comma, and use the value of that to give it into the CHOOSECOLS function. So the way that works, the whole thing, and actually I'll leave that one where it is. All right, so down here, I will take that function the way we had it before, and I'm just going to put this whole thing into a CHOOSECOLS function. And everybody here, I could simply write out what numbers I wanted to see. So if I wanted columns 1 and 3 and 5, I could type 1, 3, 5 here. But the trick that I'm going for is I want to dynamically pass in 1, 3, 5 so that later it can be 1, 2, 4 if I want it to be. So here this is do a value function on the text split function. And I hand it these values right here. And I say break every time there's a comma. And then I just close all the parentheses there are. And that right there, everybody, you can see this is just the columns I've asked for. If I uncheck this checkbox, that column disappears. If I uncheck this checkbox, that column disappears. If I click, it comes back. Let's see. So the question is, couldn't we filter the columns similarly to the way we did before? Yes. So everybody, the key here is you need, so the idea is we want to be able to dynamically choose which columns to include or exclude. And so you can dynamically pass in either 1, 1, 0, 0, 1 to the filter tool in an array, or you can pass in 1, 3, 5 to the CHOOSECOLS tool as an array, or as a set of values. Either way would work very nicely here. And everybody, let me just point at what Eve's talking about right now. Everybody, the number of times, again, I have walked into a room and I have said, everybody, the number one thing you should learn is Power Query. And everybody in the room's like, I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, I am right there with you. I love Power Query so much. It's like a third child to me. I was going to say second child. I do have 2 children, so it's like my third child. All right. All right, looking good, everybody. So hopefully you see some interesting things here, right? Some ability for us to reshape what is being output by these different systems. Let me go ahead and show you a few more tricks here. Everybody, to Eve's point about Power Query, I actually put it right here on the screen. These 2 problems right here on this page have always been Power Query problems to me. And then I realized that text split and wrap rows can actually solve these problems. And I was just dumbfounded by that. So here's the first problem. The first problem is I have a bunch of names separated by semicolons. I do not want to go text to columns. That's not the point. I do not want more columns for each person's name. I instead want one big column of all of these people's names. And so if I use the text split function, =, text split right there, and I pass in all of these cells that contain all these people's names, and I tell it to make a new column every time something happens. I'm not going to do that, but make a new row every time it runs into a semicolon. Then I can hit enter, and just like that, a full list of every name that's in that list over on the left. That just, I mean, again, I don't have that much hair. I'm, definitely losing it day by day, but it definitely blew my hair back when I saw that. And then you can tack on to this things like the unique function in order to make sure that you only have a unique list of those names that were over here on the right. And if you wanted an alphabetical list, you would simply put the sort function around that as well. And now it's an alphabetical unique list of all the names that were separated by semicolons in the roster column on the left. I love that so much. I thought text split was good just when it was split it every time it runs into a comma or something like that. But when I saw that it could split it into new rows, I was absolutely ecstatic about that. And similarly, everybody, in case you're ever in this situation, you know, it really is a very specific use case, but the wrap rows function, all you have to do is say, hey, here is a set of values. It's what they call a vector of values going down the page or going across. And then, comma, how often should we wrap back? So here we have employee ID, first name, last name, date of hire, salary. That's 5 columns. And then it wraps back around. So we type in a 5, and we close the parentheses, and there you are. I mean, just the amount of time most people spend on stuff like that is painful to think about. All right. So we're going to move forward here. I have, I think, probably 4 or 5 more big functions I want to talk about and different techniques for using them. If everybody's feeling good, feel free to stick up on yes, exactly right, Lee. No refreshing. You know, I'm the biggest proponent of Power Query. I saw that one of your other speakers was going to be speaking about Power Query, and I was like, okay, I can't go down that path. All right, no Power Query today. So yeah, functions are where it's at on today's session. Okay. I think you've probably heard, many of us have heard about the benefits of sequence. You know, I very often will need to make a numbered list of things. And so giving me something like the sequence function is really helpful, right? You do a sequence function and it says how many rows, how many columns, where should it start, and how much should it go up by? Oh yeah, that's great, right? I want to make, let's say 100 rows and 1 column, starting at 5 and going up every 5. And when I close the parentheses, now it goes 5, 10, 15, 20. Lovely. I think to myself, that's super helpful, right? The number of times you've typed in a 5, then typed in a 10, and then auto-filled that together, probably thousands of times, right? Things that are similar to that. So it's nice that the sequence function exists. But then what I saw what some people on the internet were using the sequence function for, and I realized that my creativity was just not even touching it. It was spectacular, some of the things I was seeing. And so this is a use case that I thought was very, very practical to me. So obviously today's date is not April 27th, and I do apologize, everybody. I am from the United States. I know a huge percentage of you are European. I apologize for my date format, but obviously today's date is not April 27th. But in order for today's session to be dynamic, I set a date instead of calculating today's date, because I think it's really very helpful to be able to have a backwards facing 1 year running report. You know, Power BI has, and DAX inside of Power Pivot have functions like, or actually, I don't even know if DAX has it, but Power BI has same period last year, right? So helpful to have same period last year as a calculation that you can use. But of course, conventional Excel doesn't have that. And so what you can do here is, based on whatever today's date is and using the sequence function, I'm going to use the eDate function and the EO month function in order to figure out what the last year looks like. So I'm just going to copy and paste this straight out of my notes here, but it's basically use the sequence function, and I want you to go up 1 through 12, and I want you to start 12 back. Okay, 1 through 12, starting 12 back from wherever we are. That is what the sequence function is doing by itself. Make 12 columns or 12 rows and go back 12 and go up 1 at a time. Now, what you further do there is you say, okay, what you want to do is you want to go to cell I3 and you want to figure out what the beginning of the month is from this. So we use the EO month function, and we say, okay, go back 1 month from that, and then go up 1 day, which will take us to, so if it's 1 day, 1 month back, it would be March 31st. And then 1 day forward would be April 1st. And so what this entire function right here does, and now we have to format it as dates, of course, as per usual. But as you can see right here, it allows us to generate from April 1st of 2023, 1 entire year in the past, through March 1st of 2024. If you wanted it to go through April 1st, all you would have to do is go into the sequence function and say you want to go 13 rows instead of 12 rows. And there it is. And now you have the ability to create a SUMIFS function that is automatically going to be generating based on this date right here. So I'll do a quick SUMIFS function where I say that we add up the transaction values here when the criteria range, and actually we want to use here, I made this a little bit fancy. We want this date over here to be greater than or equal to this date right there. And then also we want the criteria range over here, those dates, to be less than, and here we could just go with the next month down. Okay, so here we have $2.39 million, $1.57 million, $2 million, $1.8 million. And here's the benefit, everybody. You can see these dates are being dynamically generated by the sequence function. So if I say today's date is now September 1st of 2024, you see that the sequence function generating all those months updates and goes back to September of 2023. And now the report is September of 2023 through September of 2024. Or if I finally use the today function, like I would be doing, right? I would actually be generating today's date. It dynamically goes back 1 year from today and generates for us a little report that we can leverage with no additional effort. That right there, everybody, I want you to think about how many times you have to pass around to other people a report that goes back to a certain date range, and then somebody takes it upon themselves to change that date range, right? If you can just dynamically build in, oh, it's always going to be the last 12 months, spectacular, right? It saves so much in terms of people working through all of that on their own. Krista, wonderful question. Everybody, I would use tables, 100%. So everybody, you'll notice over here, there's a table, right? I always use Power Query. I always use tables, 100% of the time. Yes, do not doubt me. I promise. I am tables all day, every day. Yeah, I just sometimes get myself into a place where I haven't made the table in the space yet. And so I just don't talk about it during class. I'm like, let's just highlight the column. No big deal. All right, lovely. Okay, so let me go ahead and finish this off with talking about group by, pivot by, and some of the benefits that we can use in there. So again, like we talked about, everybody, we have here a table full of data. And of course, this table would probably be linked to a query to some outside data sources, would be refreshable, all the rest of it, 100%. Now, as I said earlier, I want to be very clear. I'm not telling anybody not to use pivot tables. I'm not going to point any fingers. There are plenty of people who want to generate interest by saying, you're never going to use a pivot table again. I don't think that that's true by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, I would say that the pivot by and group by functions for most of your everyday users are so much more complex to build than a standard pivot table is, that it won't be at the top of my list of things to talk about. But what pivot by and group by do is they allow you to generate what is effectively a pivot table without any of the trappings and restrictions of a pivot table, which is a very interesting space. So for example, a really simple one here. You could imagine I would want to have a pivot table based on the total reporting amount per subsidiary. Makes total sense, right? So over here on the right, I would use either group by or pivot by. Group by is the one I almost always go for because I almost always go with simpler pivot tables over more complex horizontal and vertical ones. Pivot by is just different in that it goes horizontally as well as vertically. So I almost always use group by because I'm trying to go with a relatively simple functionality. And so here, everybody, I'm going to highlight all of the subsidiary names over here on the table, and then a comma. And for the values that go into the pivot table, I'm going to highlight the reporting amount column. And then finally, comma, what function would you like to use? And as you can see here, all of the different names of functions that it wants you to use are on the dropdown here. So I'll use a simple sum function, and then close the parentheses and hit enter. And as you can see, again, a very, very simplistic version of what a pivot table might be, right? So we have all of the subsidiary names down the left-hand side. We have all of the reporting amounts down the right-hand side. This function does have sorting as a possibility, as filtering as a possibility. And if you use things like the Lambda function, we have the ability to do more than one function in here, all sorts of different things. On top of that, I'm going to go in and I'm going to make another quick pivot table. I'm just going to copy and paste this straight out of my notes here so I don't talk through it too much. I know that we're getting close to the end of what we want to be doing today, but right now I'm going to use the pivot by function, and I am going to choose the vendor country and the subsidiary name columns, and I'm going to tell it to make a sum-based pivot on this. So I hit enter, and as you can see right here, yes, we have the subsidiary, and then we have the country that that subsidiary was doing business in as a subordinate element. Now, the very first time I ever heard about tree map charts, I thought to myself, oh, this is cool. Let me go make that in a pivot table, because it felt like the most obvious thing in the world that we would have a dynamic tree map chart based on a pivot table. Some of you may not have done this before, but it's not possible. When you go in and make a pivot chart in Excel, it stops you from using the tree map type because the tree map type is more modern and wasn't built into the pivot table engine. But this doesn't have those restrictions. So if you have made a pivot table by using the pivot by or group by functions, you can go to the insert tab at the top of the screen, make yourself a tree map chart just like so, and you have exactly what you were hoping for without anybody telling you not to. You know how often you get slapped on the wrist by Excel? No, you're not allowed to do that. You got to do something fancy or whatever. And as you can see, it is absolutely possible as long as you leverage things like group by and pivot by. Quick note here, everybody. You would have to go an extra layer deeper if you wanted to have a pivot by or group by pivot table filtered with a slicer. Because what this does, you see the pivot by function says, go over to that table and use that table as the data source. And it doesn't have a capability for this to be filtered by the table, because in the same way as most other functions, it doesn't pay attention to the filtering. But those of you who know about this, if you have a function that you want to pay attention to filtering the source data, you want to use the subtotal function to make that happen. So by using a subtotal function, you can filter this by a slicer. But right now, I think this is about the place where we wanted to land the plane in terms of timing and duration. I'm happy to stick around and answer additional questions or go down other paths that we didn't go down during today's session. But I'm going to go ahead and pass the ball back over to Alan for a moment. How's everybody doing?
I have caught the ball. Yeah, doing good. I just popped into the chat if there's any questions, because that's always a good use of our time and our kind of live time and stuff.
Absolutely.
What was your Lambda example? Is that big one, or is that?
So I started off Lambda definitely focusing on the custom function side of things, right? Because there are scenarios, like for example, this one that I always show people, the len minus len with the substitute, because I mean, one of the easiest things for people to get frustrated by is they're trying to use text to columns or other similar functionality. And they say, oh, but I can't guarantee that the people's names always follow the pattern, or I can't guarantee that the address always follows this pattern. And so what I've been telling people to do is to use this function right here, = len of this original text minus the length of the original text. If we were to substitute whatever the original text is, if we were to substitute anytime you found a space with no space. And that simply, there we go, that simply generates a whole bunch of ones, and then every once in a while it generates a 3 or a 2 because somebody's name has more than one space in it, or somebody's address has too many commas in it, or anything else where the pattern is not easily held to. So what I'm showing people to do these days is you can use the Lambda function to make that a named function that you can simply leverage in your spreadsheet. So you would go up here to the Formulas tab at the top of the screen, define a new name for yourself, call this something like number of spaces, and then throw your Lambda function in there. Text input.
You're brave.
Substitute. You know what's great is typing live in front of people. Anytime you can do that.
What could possibly go wrong in that little box?
Exactly. Oh, yeah, one extra parentheses there. Okay. Ooh, one more parentheses.
Hold on, Mike, we'll get to you, mate. Nice, thanks, Heather.
Okay. Oh, no. Yeah, we'll come back to that. We'll come back to that. Let's see here. Oh, perfect. Absolutely. Oh, yeah, Mike, what can I do for you?
Okay, I've got a question which could be aimed at you, it could be aimed at Alan, it could be aimed at anybody who might be able to answer it, because it stumped me. I had a group by function. I was picking up the filter from a drop-down list, but if the cell with the drop-down list in it was empty, it was throwing up an error. I think it's throwing up a value. So what I ended up doing, and this was actually on this week's YouTube video, what I ended up doing was combining if with group by. So I said, if the cell with the drop down is double quote, do this group by without the filter argument, otherwise do it with the filter argument. And I was just wondering if there would be a simpler way of doing that, maybe I couldn't get it to work with let. I chat GPT'd it. It wouldn't give me the right answer.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's possible. ChatGPT was coming back and saying that group by doesn't work with let in the standard way. And I spent ages on it. I just wondered if you had any idea.
Yes.
And I know Alan is a bit of a Lambda man.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm surprised, but I mean, I'm not sure ChatGPT is right on what it said there, because I know I did a pivot by with a let the other day. So I know it's not quite the same thing, but one would
I'll have
assume.
another go.
But yeah, I'm not sure I've done the blank value situation.
I basically tried to concatenate the group by function with the filter argument, and that didn't work. So I ended up just doing an old-fashioned if and repeating the group by, but without the filter argument. So it's a bit long-winded, but it worked. I just wondered if you knew of a shorter.
Unfortunately, like I think what I was talking through, I've always been focused on trying to make group by and pivot by work as similarly to a standard pivot table as possible.
Yeah.
Been really laser focused on getting slicers and timelines and things like that to work.
That's what I was doing. I was actually trying to replicate the old-fashioned filter of a pivot table where you've got the drop down. But it just wouldn't work.
That's very interesting. Yeah, Alan, I don't know if you want to try to mock anything up, Alan? All right.
Sorry, mate, for the
no worries.
chat.
Yeah, to Eve's question here, you're absolutely right. So knowledge transfer and things like that. So the biggest thing on my end is, and this is why everybody, to go back to it, I do use Power Query so often to make sure that what's in the spreadsheet is just, here is a table of data that if you refresh it, it will have whatever the latest version is. It has all the calculations built into it, etc. And so whenever I'm trying to sort of stock things up for people, that's sort of my go-to, is building all the tables in place, making sure that they work without anybody having to think about it. And of course, all of the documentation and things like that are built into the query, and we go from there. I think the biggest thing for me is when I see people who are going through the hoops of, various different index and offset and all sorts of different things to try to accomplish their tasks. And of course, all the people who are out there copying and pasting wildly, I'm trying to avoid those people from having to jump through those hoops. And so I think that's the major space that I think this works in for me. Ooh, no, I haven't tried that. The images inside the cells in the data set, I haven't played around. I see people on YouTube using images a lot, bringing in flags and those sorts of things. I really should start to integrate things like logos and flags and stuff like that into my use cases. I haven't been scared. Don't be scared, Alan.
Yeah, that was on that was more for Eve's point. I think he's questioned about the knowledge transfer.
Yeah, exactly.
I normally say to people, yeah, on the logos there, Sergio. I think with these new functions, but like when you brought up group by and pivot by earlier, especially, but the same kind of goes to XLOOKUP as well. Even like when you show it on like a normal training course to normal people, they see that volume of questions and thinks, oh lordy lord.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think, look, don't let it scare you. You don't even need most of them.
Exactly. And that's where, like I said, for me, group by and pivot by are more a use case for people who are much, much more advanced, right? People who know what they're trying to get and want to be able to make it jump through hoops that it wasn't capable of before. And the fact that in a standard pivot table, so much of it can just be done by clicking checkboxes and dragging and dropping means that from a knowledge transfer perspective, I'm 100% pivot tables, you know, for those folks, right? And for just general use overall. I think that for XLOOKUP, I've been able to have good success. You know, if somebody is trying VLOOKUP and they're trying XLOOKUP side by side, like that pretty much works for them. You know, the fact that VLOOKUP is kind of antiquated at this point, and XLOOKUP has those things taken care of. Those sort of make sense to a lot of folks. And of course, like unique, I think makes a ton of sense to people. But yeah, when you start getting into multiplying conditions against one another and the filter function and stuff like that, then people go, okay, this is not for me. I'm bailing. I'm out, you know. So it's yeah, it's an interesting thing when you have to pass it from one type of user to a different type of user. Yeah. Exactly.
For your everyday user, that step from sum ifs to filter is quite it's quite large.
Yeah. Oh, I mean,
I think at times we like to show off, and it's not best for the best thing for the end user, is it?
Yeah. Oh yeah. And let's be very clear here. When I came into today's session, I'm definitely thinking to myself, what can I do to make people go, ooh, look at that. That's interesting. That's a thing I haven't seen before. Yeah, it's you know, your typical session and session for you good folks maybe a little different.
Well, I think on that note, Neil, what you did there I thought was great, because obviously a lot of the people in this audience are quite advanced folk, but we can't take that for granted. And I am streaming on YouTube and that as well. So the fact that you started with, you know, just the fundamentals of what even is a dynamic array, like did some examples, but then obviously you did skip for the sexier stuff for the advanced folk. Good. So a bit for everybody.
Absolutely. You saying that makes me think. I always tell people this next thing is really cool. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm a huge nerd. So what's cool for me is not the same thing as what's cool for
You sound like me, Neil.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Somebody says, this is the sexiest part of Excel. Really? You go, oh, yeah, it is. This is fantastic. Oh, awesome.
I think people liked the column choosing.
Yeah, it's really and you know, being able to sort of bounce back and forth between that and the filter function to either choose it based on logical tools or choose it based on position, and you know, being able to pass it in different ways is an interesting feature. You know, rearrange things a bit and make exactly the report people want to see happen.
Cool. Just got to answer a question, team. If anyone's got any questions, please, or if you just want to say hello or something, please take this opportunity. Just give me a couple of minutes. Yes, sir. Right. Cool. Sorry, let me just bring my Zoom back. Just had to quickly do something. Josephine goes good. Neil, you don't run a local user group, do you?
I don't. I don't. I guess I should.
Why not?
Hey. People in Orlando want Excel? Absolutely.
Yeah. See if you can get it as part of the what's that ticket you get so you can go Universal and Disney. Get yours in there.
Exactly.
And also an Excel user group.
2 days in the Disney parks, 2 days in the Universal Park, 1 day in Excel training. It's great.
Yeah, that's it. Why not? Look to one day. All right, team. It all seems a bit quiet. Just to throw it there, any other questions, team? Please feel to take this opportunity.
Hope everybody's having a great evening.
Oh yeah.
This was very good, Neil. Thank you, Eve here.
Thanks, Eve.
Yeah, awesome. So yeah, on the Excel, I'm curious about. I was curious about Alan's Excel local on the Meetup group, how that was working, and I'm curious to see if there's other Excel groups out there to get people kind of engaged, and it doesn't have to be like super high level, but more users and people who are in their trenches every day and they're trying to look for quick tips and tricks and trying to get some ideas. That's one of the reasons why I'm here today, is trying to get some ideas about how a meetup could be run locally, in person or online at a local level, not on a, probably this audience here, a lot of experts, I'm assuming, but at a smaller level, how would that work? Yeah, just an interest, kind of a comment more than a question.
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly obviously speak from, well, we can probably speak outside of this from my point of local. I mean, I think Faraz is still in the room, and I'm pretty sure he's been doing some local stuff in Saudi Arabia recently, so he might have had comments as well. But most of these events are online, to be fair, so there's only a few of us doing the local thing. Me being one of them. Most of them do it online, which is obviously a lot easier.
Yeah.
The booking of venues and all this shenanigans is the hardest bit for sure.
Is Celia organizing any in-person ones, Alan? Do you know? Because I know she's definitely running the Toronto Meetup
Celia?
group.
No. She used to,
I think
long time
online.
ago. I don't
Online.
think she's done an in-person one for years.
And then Danielle
No,
is
she hasn't. She's just online.
Yeah. Danielle is doing the Women in Financial Modeling one in Australia. And I think sometimes she has some in-person activities as part of that. And then who else? Ken used to, I think. Ken posts.
Yeah, I mean, I don't believe he does any at the moment. Whether he
Yeah,
used
I
to
don't think he does
a
at the
long
moment.
time ago, like pre-COVID, I'm not so sure. When I haven't seen anything. Oh, actually, I think I'll tell you who else does. Not it probably helps anyone here. But I think Wynn does over in Perth.
Hopkins.
He does,
Yep.
yeah. That's another one. But yeah, there's not many of us doing the local stuff.
I think Wins is mainly Power BI, isn't it?
Yeah.
I've been to a couple.
Yeah. Of the online ones, I'm assuming, like.
Yeah.
Just pop by.
Having said that, I was training at 2 o'clock in the morning on Monday morning for Australia.
Yes.
Hard
Got
with
rather
time
you than
zones.
me. Yes. Yeah, for us. I was pretty sure I saw some of your meetups being in person. Local ones are great, yes. I know it's tough for people to get to them, so apologies for those of you who don't have a local user group. But for those that can around the world, it's obviously a lot of fun. It's great to meet people in person. Cool. Well, I'll say we'll connect if you already are connected. Same for us. We can always pick our brains. Not that I know much about Austin to help in terms of venues, but general ideas.
Lots of stuff going on in Austin.
I hear it's the place to be. Mr. X himself is there.
Right, that's right. We had the Formula One for one this weekend, so yeah. Anyway.
Okay.
Yeah.
I did not know. Is that the first time over there?
No, it's been there for several years now. They
Is
put
it?
it back.
Ah, shows a little line there.
Yeah.
I know they're all over the place now, but
True.
they'll go where the money isn't they, mate? Can't stay in Europe.
Excellent.
Oh, cool. Questions about the global. It sounds something nice. All right, team. As soon as I asked for questions, suddenly the chat window went crazy. I've not been able to keep up with it. The question about Munich from Christo, which I'm sure is a bit of a joke question. We went to Munich a little while ago. We may have some news soon about a traveling meetup. Talking about local meetups. More on that hopefully soon.
Not doing another marathon, are you?
Without the marathon. But with the travel and the Excel bit. I think I might be pausing the marathons for a while, mate.
Was that one a once in a lifetime, the marathons?
Something like that, yeah. Well done. How many have I done? I've done 4 in my life so
Have
far.
you? Four more than me.
Spaced apart, giving them a rest, so time consuming.
Half marathons in my 30s were good enough for me. Full marathons in my 40s are not going to happen.
Yeah. It's a tough gig, especially with kids and Excel.
Yes, indeed.
Right, I'll tell you what, I should probably stop this stream with us chatting away here. The YouTube thing's still going along. So we just say goodbye to those of you on YouTube. Let's add in that. We should have stopped that a while ago with us kind of talking a bit more casually.